We're continuing our sermon series that parents say the darndest things, but of all the messages in this series, none applies to all of us more than this particular message. When we say to our children, we say to ourselves, we say to others in our family or church, well, we can't do anything about that. We need to stay away from that because it's none of our business. Especially when it deals with children, it becomes such a difficult issue. And today, I think Jesus' words to us are so powerful that sometimes we miss the power of these words. We all love children, right? And wasn't the children's message fun? And isn't it fun to see the children getting Bibles? And don't we love to see them when they come forward, the children's choir, and sing? But we must never forget our obligation, our responsibility to care and love for them. Not just ours, but all of the children. When Jesus said this statement, you cannot imagine, unless you really can put yourself back in biblical times, how powerful this statement was. Because children were seen simply as property. They weren't important. They were being disregarded. You didn't care about the children. So when he says this statement, you all should be like children. The power of that would have shaken the foundations of everyone hearing it. They would have known that something was different. And then he brought the child. Here, this man that we call the Messiah, this man that we know as the Son of God, brought an outcast, a worthless piece of material, of property, onto his lap, and he blessed them. The power, the importance of children in our community of faith, in the lives around us, in the world around us, is just exhibited by Jesus in this one act. And it reminds us then of the importance of us to care and to love one another and to put the needs of others above ourselves. Through the words of Paul, we hear that. I want to share something with you. I shared this one other time, but sometimes I really don't care if I share a story more than once. I'm sorry, sometimes somebody said it takes 7 times before you hear something, before you remember it anyway. So I'm going to go with that. But sometimes stories are so important. That's why we talk about biblical stories over and over. It's the reason we give children Bibles to study those stories, and we teach them in church school classes. But I'm going to tell you the story from my life. When I was in 7th grade, I will never, ever forget this. I delivered newspapers like many 7th graders, and I can remember delivering the Indianapolis Star. And on Sundays, that was quite a load, and it took a lot of work. It was one of those big, thick newspapers. And I delivered that, and as I was delivering the paper, on one particularly Sunday morning, I was done. And mind you, I probably should have been in church, but I never went to church. So I couldn't have been in church. But I took a section of the newspaper, and there was a story. There was a story in that newspaper that shook my foundation. There was a story in that newspaper that changed my life. It was the story of a young woman about my age who had been left by her parents with people they knew. I have no problem remembering her name. Her name was Sylvia Likens. And Sylvia Likens was beaten and tortured. She had pain inflicted on her body. They burned her. They cut her. And she died. And you know who knew? A lot of people. There were people in the family. She was missing school. The pastor of the church. All these people had insight into what happened to Sylvia Likens. But I guess they decided it was none of their business. I can tell you that story impacted my life because it has never, ever left me. It made me more of an advocate for children, but it took much too long before I really became an advocate. And at my last church, we started a 7-point plan for fighting child abuse. And we were involved in the community, and we trained foster parents and CASAs, and we did the backpack programs that fed the children. We sent people to school. People like you retired folks out there. We sent you into schools to read, to teach them to read, because they need help. And they're crying for people to do the same thing here. And that's what we did. And it happened to me because I was impacted by an adult survivor of child abuse. I regret that it took me so long. I regret that I didn't even pay attention enough to what was going on around me. And so today, that's the message for today. Open your eyes. Pay attention. I don't know how many times I've quoted John Donne. I'll probably quote John Donne once a quarter till I die. Because John Donne said, we're a part of one another. And the death of anyone diminishes me, because we're part of the whole. Sin therefore not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Whenever a child is abused or hurt, it should be tolling for you and for me. If we could have done something about it. You want to know some statistics? I know people said, oh guys, this is a sermon, you shouldn't be doing this stuff. Well, I want to tell you some statistics. I think Jesus would approve of me doing this when he called the little child to his lap. More than 5 children in the United States die every day from child abuse. 5 children every day. Of those, 80% are under 4 years old. In this country, 1 out of 6 boys and 1 out of 4 girls are abused by the time they reach 18 years old. Think about that in this congregation. We would have 25% of the adult women in this church stand up. Think about that. 1 out of 4. 14% of all men in prisons have been abused as children. 36% of all women in prison were abused as children. The abused are 59% more likely to be arrested as a juvenile, 28% more likely to be arrested as adults, 30% more likely to create a violent crime, 30% will abuse their own children. Do you hear how we're connected to them? Do you see how our society is connected, our church is connected? And here's the startling statistic for me, because when I was a child, and a lot of you were raised in my generation, and we were warned about those folks. We were taught a program, you may remember the name, some of you, Stranger Danger. Anybody else remember that besides me? What a great idea. The only problem with it is 90% of children are abused by someone they know. 9 out of 10. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the pain of that? It's a very difficult situation. 30% are abused by family members. That's an amazing statistic to me. They're abused by someone they know and they trust. And by the way, just so you know, these statistics cut across every class, every economic class, every ethnicity, every religious class, and every level of education. So just because you're educated, or white, or wealthy, you could be just as likely to abuse your children as someone else. And so what is the church doing about that? Isn't that the question? Jesus said, bring these kids to me. They're going to inherit the kingdom of God. Bless them. And what are we doing? Too often we're turning a blind eye, aren't we? Oh my goodness, do we love to pick on the Catholics though? Because their pain has been so visible, so public. But I want to tell you, child abuse is happening within every congregation and every denomination. People that go to church just like the ones that don't. So what are we doing about it becomes the real question. What about us? Are we saying it's none of our business? Or as a community of faith, do we realize it has to be our business? That's the real question. That's the question for me. A couple of the sites I use when I'm preparing a sermon, they'll have all kinds of other people's sermons published. And I always like to look through there just to see what people are saying. I mentioned that before, but I searched by topic, and I just wanted you to know something. You want to know what the church is doing about child abuse? I'll tell you. Of the sermons on this website, when I searched the subject was church, there were 8,320 sermons about church. There were 7,601 sermons about love. 1,565 about family, 1,402 about marriage, 115 about wine, 115 sermons about wine, 100 about boating. I'm not kidding. 100 sermons about boating, 86 about dogs, 37 about pigs, and 4 about child abuse. What is the church doing? Burying our head in the sand and acting like it's not there. It is time for the church to stand up. It's time for the people in the church to stand up, to do something about this horrible epidemic. There was a movie out several years ago based on a true story called Antoine Fisher. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was the story of a young man in the Navy who had been sent to foster care when he was young, had been abused over and over again, and neglected by his own natural family, treated terribly by them and the foster families. And he's trying to deal with violence and anger as an adult, and he's seeing a psychiatrist. And in the midst of the movie, he shares a poem that he had written with the psychiatrist. Listen to these words from the poem. Who will cry for the little boy lost and all alone? Who will cry for the little boy abandoned without his own? Who will cry for the little boy who cried himself to sleep? Who will cry for the little boy who never had for keeps? Who will cry for the little boy who walked the burning sand? Who will cry for the little boy, the boy inside the man? Who will cry for the little boy who knew well hurt and pain? Who will cry for the little boy who died again and again? Who will cry for the little boy, a good boy he tried to be? Who will cry for the little boy who cries inside of me? In the movie, it became cathartic as Antoine Fisher could say, I'm going to cry for the little boy. And he cried for himself. And the psychiatrist said to him, well, you seem to be upset for those around you because you didn't feel they came to your rescue. Maybe they didn't know. And then Antoine Fisher said this, how could they not have known? How could we not have known about the Sylvia Likens and the hundreds and thousands of other children that are abused and have died? Many of you know one of my best friends, Lynn, and Lynn was sexually and physically abused from the time she was 2 years old to the time she escaped her home at about 15 and a half and just escaped. She still deals with physical issues from those days. It's caused her to have dialysis once a week. She is a diabetic because of damage to her pancreas. And I could go on and on and on. But a lot of people looked the other way. A lot of people, when she was taken to the emergency room time after time after time, looked the other way. A lot of people, when she was injured in school and couldn't sit in her seat as a young girl, looked the other way. Maybe they looked the other way because her father was a Methodist minister. Maybe they looked the other way because we didn't want to get involved. Maybe they looked the other way because it was a rural area, but we look the other way all the time, don't we? Lynn survived. Lynn survived because she had a love for music, and the music would take her places to get away from the pain. I'm sure some of you know that more than me. Lynn survived because she was extremely intelligent, and she could do things and take herself to other places. And she rose not to be an abuser like so many of these, but to become a child advocate for abused children. And she rose in her career to an executive position in a big company. And she survived because she dealt with it. And it was when Lynn and I met that I became more of a child advocate. It was when Lynn and I met that Lynn then said she needed to start telling her story that she'd never, ever told. And so now she tells her story whenever she can. Just after I met Lynn, in fact, we really hadn't become friends yet, Lynn's father escaped any justice in Indiana, divorced and moved to California and got remarried. And Lynn, as an adult child, tried to tell his new wife about him. But he had a new baby, and he began molesting the new baby, and the mother would not listen. Fortunately or unfortunately, he also molested the neighbor, and the neighbor told him. And he went to prison in California. And Lynn became good friends then with her half-sister, who also loved music, and who was 20 years younger than her. And 2 months after I became Lynn's pastor, her father was up for parole in California, and her sister went and spoke out against the parole. And they gave him parole anyway. And shortly after that, Lynn's sister Sarah took her own life because she couldn't stand the thought of him coming after her again. What did the church do? Nothing. Nothing. Lynn went to the church in San Diego, and I hate to say this, I hate to say it every time I say it, a United Methodist church. And Lynn wrote a song about her sister that she planned to play on the guitar as part of the service, and the pastor didn't want to hear it, so here's what he said to her: "I'm sorry, we don't allow guitars in the Methodist church in San Diego." So that night, before the funeral the next day, Lynn went home and rewrote the song for piano. Hard to keep Lynn down. And the next day, she sang a song, and it was entitled, "How Could They Ever Know?" And she was talking about the pain that would lead someone to suicide, because Lynn knew something she's told me 100 times. There is something worse than death for children of abuse that are abused over and over and over again. She said many times she would have welcomed death because it would have meant freedom from pain. How could they ever know what she suffered? And you see, folks, that's where we fit into the picture. We need to look around us. We need to pay attention in our church, in our Sunday school classes. You teachers, I know you already do. We have great teachers in this church. And I know you love your students. Pay attention. Pay attention. It doesn't matter where they're at. Pay attention in your neighborhoods, in your families. Pay attention. Did we have a hint that someone might be being abused? Do we have a clue? Don't look the other way. Tell someone. Call Child Protective Services. Tell a teacher. Tell a pastor. Someone. Tell someone. Don't let us hear those words. How could they have not known what was going on? I know this isn't an easy message today. It's not always an easy message to hear. But you see, the church is about a lot more than just feeling good. The church is about a lot more than just coming in and worshiping on Sunday. Jesus tells us the church is to protect the children of this world, not just our own, but everyone. Won't you help us do that? Pay attention. Look around and realize every child anywhere is your business. Thanks be to God. Amen.